Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming down to our Tacoma office. We have the AG's office has 13 offices around the state, so it's great to be here in our Tacoma office. And before we get started, I want to introduce a few folks who I'm joined by today. To my left is someone many of you will recognize. That's one of our state representatives, Lori Jenkins, who represents our office right here in Tacoma. So she's a legislator we do an awful lot of work with. And she's here today, and I'll speak a bit more about that later on because she's especially involved on the issues that pertain to this lawsuit and this Consumer Protection Act, and she's been a real leader on these issues. So you'll be hearing from Representative Jenkins shortly. To my right are two members of my consumer protection teams. These are Assistant Attorneys General in the AG's office. Audrey Udishin is to my immediate right, and Bob Hyde is further to my right. And they will be helping to answer questions that you may have about this litigation, but they've been working hard in this case for many months at this point. Washington State's charity laws are meant to ensure that all hospitals in our state provide access to free or reduced cost medical care to low-income patients who need it. It's obviously a very important set of laws. Today, I filed a lawsuit in Pierce County Superior Court against St. Joseph Medical Center here in Tacoma, alleging the hospital repeatedly violated Washington State's Consumer Protection Act by withholding charity care from tens of thousands of low-income patients since at least 2012. St. Joseph's, as many of you know, is the flagship facility of CHI Franciscan, a large Washington-based healthcare system. To be clear, this lawsuit is specifically related to the conduct at St. Joseph. Moreover, senior managers within St. Joseph knew about complaints associated with these illegal practices, knew they were a problem, and did not correct them. St. Joseph was founded by the Sisters of St. Francis, who, and I'm quoting now from St. Joseph's website, ministered to all people, regardless of race, religion, or financial status. The hospital's vision, I'm quoting again, is to lead the transformation of healthcare to achieve optimal health and well-being for the individuals and communities we serve, especially those who are poor and vulnerable. Our investigation, however, uncovered that St. Joseph is not living up to that vision. In fact, it was doing exactly the opposite. St. Joseph placed obstacles in the way of thousands of individuals in need of affordable health care. These are individuals who, moreover, had to make hard choices, paying money they should not have had to pay for health care rather than paying the rent or feeding their children. These laws exist for a reason, to help ensure that everyone has access to affordable medical care. St. Joseph's conduct is illegal and it harms vulnerable Washingtonians. So today I'm going to briefly provide an overview of our charity care laws. Second, I'll describe how St. Joseph violated those laws. Third, we'll present just some of the evidence that my team uncovered through its lengthy investigation of St. Francis. And fourth, we'll explain what we're hoping to accomplish with this lawsuit, and afterwards we're happy to take any questions that you might have. I'll start with questions for those here in the room. I don't think we have folks on the line. We'll turn to some questions for those on the phone, then come back to a couple final questions here as well. So briefly, an overview of our law. All hospitals in Washington State, whether you're for-profit or nonprofit, public or private, are required by Washington State law to provide charity care to individuals who are at or below 200% of the federal poverty level. The law requires hospitals to meaningfully provide patients information about the availability of charity care. In violation of the law, St. Joseph repeatedly failed to provide that notice. I'll give you an example. St. Joseph made no effort to screen for charity care with their patients. Instead, they aggressively trained their staff to seek payment before providing charity care information, thereby deceiving patients and violating the law. The law also prohibits hospitals from requiring more than one document to prove a patient's eligibility for charity care. St. Joseph unlawfully required multiple forms of documentation. I want to be clear about this. This is not some procedural requirement. This requirement of multiple documents placed a significant obstacle to vulnerable patients seeking access to affordable care and resulted in denials of 50% of their applicants. I spent a year directing emergency services office through the Jesuit Volunteer Corps. You only need to spend 1 hour leading a social service agency to understand if you require multiple forms of documentation or ID, you will be turning away many, many folks who walk in your door. This isn't complicated. This is not a procedural requirement. Once you do that, you will have the exact impact and effect that St. Joseph's experienced. They turned away half the folks because of that requirement. During our investigation, we uncovered evidence that St. Joseph's on-site vendor, supervised by St. Joseph, systematically trained employees to violate the law. We also uncovered evidence that St. Joseph's senior management became aware of these concerns and failed to address most of them. As I mentioned earlier, employees were trained to demand payment upfront before providing information about charity care. I'll just give you a couple examples. Now, that payment could be $250 or more upfront for uninsured patients. Training materials instructed staff, and I'm quoting now from the training materials, quote, avoid phrases that give patients the option to not pay. One former employee reported they were told to, and I'm quoting now from the former employee, they were told to, quote, never volunteer information about St. Joseph's charity care program to patients, even if they were obviously low income or homeless. That former employee also reported that they were instructed to, and I'm quoting again from that former employee, to encourage patients to pay the deposit by indicating that I could only provide them with a charity care application if they paid a deposit first. Our investigation revealed that St. Joseph's senior management received notice of these problems, but failed to take corrective action. In 2014, the hospital's human resource director sent an email to Senior Vice President of Human Resources and then President of the hospital reporting staff concerns about complaints regarding these aggressive billing practices that they were not being dealt with. She said in the email, a staffer reported, quote, at least one patient complaint daily about our billing collection practices, and that the employee, quote, doesn't think they are being adequately taken care of. The HR director also reported some specific patient complaints to senior management. One patient reported that the demand for a large payment he couldn't afford made him reconsider whether to have heart surgery. Another complaint came from one of St. Joseph's own employees who received notice of a debt collection lawsuit against her despite being assured that her accounts were on hold while her charity care application was being processed. The VP at St. Joseph called this complaint, quote, terrible news from a very credible employee, and acknowledged that echoed complaints from the hospital's employee union that similar issues were happening, quote, on a regular basis. In a document also obtained in our investigation, one executive wrote to colleagues, quote, I'm afraid this is going to backfire on us if we are not very careful very soon. Despite senior management being aware of these problems, St. Joseph did not take steps to fix many of the problems until after my office started investigating in January of 2016. These illegal practices resulted in significant harm to the community. Between 2012 and 2015, St. Joseph consistently provided charity care at much lower rates than the regional average. And I believe we have a chart to my left that illustrates this. Sometimes as much as 40% lower. If St. Joseph had provided charity care at the regional average, it would have given $70 million more to help its neediest patients pay their medical bills. For St. Joseph's illegal conduct, I'm asking the court to provide restitution for low-income patients harmed by the hospital's practices. In addition, I'm seeking civil penalties for tens of thousands of violations of the state's Washington State's consumer protection law. Each violation under state law can have a penalty of up to $2,000. So just to be clear, we're alleging thousands of violations of our Consumer Protection Act. Each individual violation of the Consumer Protection Act, a judge can impose a penalty of up to $2,000. The state's charity care laws exist so Washington's most vulnerable patients have access to affordable care. Our office will work hard to ensure that all patients have access to affordable care by enforcing these very important laws. Next time, we're going to hear from Representative Jenkins. I mentioned before, she's been a real leader on these issues in the state legislature. We greatly appreciate her being here, taking time from her busy schedule to join us, and just appreciate her tremendous leadership. She's a great partner in Olympia, but especially on these extremely important issues. So Representative Jenkins, go right ahead.
Thanks, Attorney General Ferguson. And I quite strongly wish I weren't here today, and wish I hadn't had to spend much of my legislative career filing charity care bill after charity care bill after charity care bill in the state legislature. As folks probably know, nearly all the hospitals in Washington State are actually nonprofits. They're required to provide charity care. They are charitable organizations. And I would just say that my personal experience related to this, I did not know the AG's office was working on a lawsuit, but I've spent much time over the last 4 years in meetings just a half a mile away up at Shiloh Baptist Church, hearing from patients of St. Joseph's Hospital, talking about charity care, talking about how the hospital has aggressively tried to seek payment from them when they have no money. I've heard from him the story that AG Ferguson told. I've heard from that staff person directly, where she was sent to collections while her charity care application was supposedly being reviewed, and heard really from dozens and dozens of people in the community. What we really need in Washington is our charitable hospitals to stand up, for St. Joseph's to stand up, to provide the charity care that they are required to by law, and that they honestly should be morally obligated to because they're a charitable organization. So I just really want to thank the AG's office for the work that they've done on this, and I'm very pleased to work in partnership with you, and we'll do things in the legislature to try and address these and other issues that have been raised over the interim.
Thank you. So just a final thought before we take your questions. Thank you, Representative Jenkins, for your hard work, and look forward to working with you in Olympia on the legislative side as well. I mentioned at the beginning that St. Joseph's was created by a group of sisters, and their stated purpose in creating the hospital was to provide access to health care for the poor. I want to be clear, St. Joseph's has lost their way from that original vision. That's a hard thing to say. I take no pleasure in saying it in the same way you take no pleasure in being here. But it's the truth, and it's not right. They're going to be held accountable, and they will absolutely correct their practices. I will accept nothing less than that. They need to make changes, systemic changes, and they're going to do it. It's unfortunate it comes to litigation to make that happen, but sometimes that's what it takes to get someone's attention, and that's what we're doing here today. We're confident in our case, and look forward to taking any questions you might have. And again, for those on the phone, I'm Audrey Udishin from my office, and Bob Hyde from my office, the Consumer Protection Division, will also help answer specific questions about the case as well. So let's start with folks in the room. Anyone have any questions here in the room?
How did you first learn about the issues that St. Joseph has been dealing with?
Audrey, do you want to maybe talk about how we first heard about it? And maybe you can spell your last name for folks on the line as well.
My last name's Udashen. We receive referrals from community members in the Tacoma area.
Other questions? Well, we have a quiet group after the Labor Day weekend. This is unusual. I'll go to folks on the phone if anyone has any questions, and we'll come back to folks here in the room. Anyone on the line? Do we have to unmute this?
Yeah,
Go ahead. Yep.
Attorney General, this is Paul Shakowski with Bloomberg Bureau of National Affairs. This is for you or one of your assistants.
Sure.
What does the law say in regard to for-profit hospitals? Are for-profit hospitals also required under statute to provide charity care?
The answer is yes, but I'll see if Audrey wants to elaborate on that at all or not. Go ahead, Audrey.
All hospitals in Washington are required to provide charity care, whether they're public hospitals, private hospitals, for-profit, or nonprofit.
Thanks.
Any other questions from those on the line? If not, back to the folks in the room. Any questions from here from folks in the room?
Have you filed any similar lawsuits regarding charity care during your tenure at the Attorney General's office, or how common has it been for this kind of lawsuit to come up from the Attorney General's office in general?
So I'll repeat the question, which I probably should have for the last one as well, is the question is, have we filed lawsuits like this in the past regarding charity care? How common is it for our office to file? Are you guys able to speak to that? Yeah, Audrey, go ahead.
This is our first affirmative lawsuit based on a hospital's charity care program. The AG's office represents the Department of Health and Certificate of Need proceedings, which can involve charity care programs. Our community partners in the private bar have been active in this area recently as well.
And maybe just one thing I'll add to that is, as you know, our consumer protection team has grown fairly significantly in the past few years, and there's many reasons for that, but part is for our office, in my view, to be engaged in areas of consumer protection law that we have not historically been involved in, that are very, very important for the people of Washington State. These cases are very complex. This investigation has gone on for a long, long time. They've gone through a lot of documents. It takes a lot of people power to bring a litigation like this to fruition. So I think it's fair to say, maybe to expand on the question a little bit, is that I'm intensely interested in this area of the law, and we have a team that's able to do these investigations and bring them, and it's one we're focused on moving forward as well.
Clarify, preceding attorney generals have not filed
I don't.
this kind of lawsuit in our state either, or only?
I don't believe so.
And we can also ask, Shannon Smith is here, who's the chief of in fact, she's just to your right, actually. Shannon Smith's just to your right, and she's been the consumer protection chief for some time, been in the office for a long time, back to Rob McKenna days, and so we can elaborate afterwards as well. I just don't want to get that wrong, but yeah.
Can we announce today, what is, and given St. Joseph's behavior regarding this issue, what is your hope for their response now that it's out there?
So the question is, what's my hope? What's my hope? What's my hope for their response? St. Joseph's response. Look, I'm accustomed to any time we file an action like this that the response is typically one of saying that our lawsuit is misguided or extreme. You pick your adjective. I'm also accustomed to the fact that at the end of the day, we usually prevail. Okay, and so it is my hope. If the question is what my hope is that St. Joseph would take an honest look at what's been going on. Acknowledge that they have lost their way. And we're not talking about a few minor tweaks to fix the problem. It goes way beyond that when you've got training materials, the emails, and we're just giving you a sampling of what we found. And so it is my hope that they acknowledge the problems and set about immediately to correct them. And I want to be clear is, if we have to litigate the case, we will. Many of our cases get resolved through a settlement. But I can guarantee you and St. Joseph's that there is zero chance I would resolve this case, settle this case, unless I am convinced that they're taking significant changes internally. Significant changes internally. That's an absolute must. It's not a matter of just paying a certain amount of money. It goes beyond that from my standpoint.
In your eyes, how damaged is their credibility by the way they handled this at this point?
The question is for those on the phone, how damaged is their credibility? I guess I don't want to speak to that. I can just speak to my reaction to reading these emails. It ticks me off. Right? I think it should tick off anybody. And I'm hoping it ticks off people at St. Joseph's to realize this is going on. Look, every institution will have challenges. Every institution will have challenges. Our office, everybody, that's the way the world works, right? My feelings are, how do you respond to those challenges? When something goes wrong, how do you respond to it? Do you act like nothing's wrong and deny it? Or do you say, hey, you know what? We screwed up. We screwed up in a significant way, and we're going to do everything we can to fix this. So it's my hope that they'll return to their roots, to why they were created, to specifically provide access to health care for the poor and vulnerable. Those are their own words. They have a legal obligation, yes, but it's also why they were founded was to do that. So it's my hope they return to their roots and take a good hard look at doing that and making sure they make that happen. Anyone else on the phone have a question before we wrap up?
Yes, this is Paul Shakowski again with Bloomberg.
Mm-hmm.
It's my recollection that there was a lawsuit commenced, not by you guys, but by maybe Columbia Legal Services. I'm not exactly sure who, in Yakima involving a for-profit institution. I'm wondering, based on that and now this lawsuit, if you perceive that there is some kind of a systemic problem among hospitals in the state with this issue, and whether you hope that this might send some sort of message to hospitals to rectify it, and whether you might reach out to the hospital association to work on this issue.
That's a good question.
I can talk a little.
Yeah, and
Go ahead.
in fact, so Representative Jenkins will address. I may even go to her first. In fact, I realized I should have given her a chance to address the earlier questions as well that are a bit more general about if you wish to. So why don't we start with Representative Jenkins, and my team or I may add to it as well. Lori?
There have been some systemic issues that we have worked on. For example, one of the things we discovered, I think about 3 years ago, is that there were hospitals were their charity care applications were 17 to 20 pages long, some of them, and the questions that were asked it was obvious that they were intended to dissuade people from applying for charity care. So I filed a bill to bring that down to a one-page application. The Hospital Association actually agreed during the course of that legislative session to just pull a work group together and to start doing a one-page application to give it to all the hospitals in the state and ask them to use it. I haven't seen the report yet about whether or not. It took them about a year to develop it, and I don't know how well that's been taken up by the hospitals in the state. But that is certainly kind of a systemic issue that we're dealing with. We've also seen a number of issues around language access, and especially Spanish-speaking patients who we just saw a report last week who are getting, by many hospitals, they just get hung up on when they call and inquire about charity care. And so there was a bill to address language access last year that died in the Senate, even though everyone agreed to the content of the bill. So there are definitely some systemic things that we're working on. I think this suit will start to highlight some of the issues that maybe we need to really focus in on and see if they're happening more broadly than at St. Joe's. And my guess is that some of them are. And my guess is that that many hospitals, charitable hospitals, in addition to St. Joe's, will be paying close attention to what happens.
Thanks very much. And Attorney General Ferguson, if you could please make the lawsuit available as soon as possible through an online link, that would be fantastic.
Yes, I'm looking at Brianna, my communications person. We're going to make that available online. So the way we're nodding our heads, we'll get that to you right away. And just to add just briefly, I think Representative Jenkins really covered it. I think one part of your question, if I recall correctly, was, are we trying to send some kind of a message to the industry with the lawsuit? I guess what I would say is that I think in most consumer protection cases that we bring, yes, there is a target, there's a defendant, there's someone who we think engaged in unlawful practices, and we want to stop that and make things right for consumers who are harmed. But I think it's also fair, at least from my perspective as Attorney General, is that, yes, I do intend to send a message to an industry at the same time. And back to the earlier question, right, is this the first kind of a case of its kind? We think that's likely the case, and yes, I want the industry to be aware that my team is focused on these kinds of cases and that we absolutely expect hospitals and medical centers to follow the law. I mentioned Shannon Smith's here, my consumer protection chief, and so we've now had a chance to work together for, I guess this is our 5th year together. She was under Rob McKenna, consumer protection chief as well, and we'd often talk in my first year about consumer protection cases, and she'd ask me, what kind of cases do you want us to bring? And I would always say, I like them all. I really do. I like all the consumer protection cases. They're all important, big, small, in the middle, but to the extent that that there's a particular type of case I have a special interest in is that when the population that's being impacted is especially vulnerable for whatever reason. Maybe they speak English as a second language. Maybe economically they're in a vulnerable state. This is that kind of a case on a large scale. This is exactly that kind of a case. And so to get back to your question, yes, I hope the industry is paying attention to this and takes a good, hard, close look at their practices and make sure that they conform with the Washington state law, which is important for its own sake, but it's especially important because the individuals who are adversely impacted if they're not following the law are the poor and the homeless, and that's not right.
Well, and I mean, I just
ahead,
want to
Cory.
add in
Yeah.
too, medical bankruptcies are the #1 cause of bankruptcy in Washington state and in the United States. So there's a lot of linkages between these healthcare costs and what happens to patients, not just somebody deferring getting heart surgery, for goodness sake, but also their whole financial life can be destroyed with these costs.
So we have a final question on the line before we wrap up?
AG Ferguson, this is Andy Hurst from AUOW.
Yes, go right ahead.
Hi there. I just have a quick question, if you don't mind, about DACA.
Oh, yes.
You sent out
Yes.
a statement yesterday saying that if the president follows through on his decision to cancel DACA, that the AG's office will file a suit. Could you just explain your reasoning behind that and why you are threatening to file a suit?
Sure, and thanks for asking that question. I did mean to just briefly touch on what's going on with potential litigation and Dreamers and the president's actions. So, I guess a couple thoughts. First, my team's been working, through this Labor Day weekend and for many days before that on preparing a potential lawsuit, anticipating that the president would taken action similar to what he's done. So first I want to thank them. There are folks you know from travel ban litigation, Colleen Melody, who heads up our civil rights team, Marcia Chen in the civil rights unit, and others. But those folks have been especially involved, and again, giving up a Labor Day weekend and many other days to get us in a position to file litigation. In terms of timing, I can't get too specific. There's a lot of conversation going on right now amongst a handful of Democratic AGs. So I was on the phone this morning with Javier Becerra of California, who's a great ally on these issues. California, of course, has many, many thousands of Dreamers in that state. And Eric Schneiderman of New York. So I think it's fair to say there is a small group of about 4 states that have been speaking daily now for, I'm looking at my chief of staff, for at least a week on this, and working very, very closely together. And then there's a large group of states that are interested as well, potentially. I communicated to my team early on that this issue was very important to me and to the office and the people of the state and to the 19,000 Dreamers who live in Washington State. We've been working closely with, again, just a few other states to prepare litigation. I don't want to say when that's going to come, but I think what you will see is at least one lawsuit, if not more than one, from different AGs around the country. And we're still working out some of the details about that. Do we file here in the Western District of Washington, or do we file in the Western District of Washington, or do we file another state with another state or other states? So there are some logistics to work out, but I think you'll be seeing a legal action coming very soon from Washington State and other AGs as well. So that prompted some right. So how about what we'll do is why don't we just take one more here, but I'm happy to chat one-on-one with anyone afterwards on the DACA stuff, because that's a long conversation. So I'll be happy to stick around and talk one-on-one. Let's take one more question from here about it, and then I'll wrap this up, and then happy to take your questions one-on-one.
I think a lot of us are curious, what would the basis of such a lawsuit?
Yeah, so until the lawsuit comes out, I won't get into the legal details of that, but the team's working on that and has been for some time. So I'll just withhold, for obvious reasons, right? And we're working with other states and working hard on that. Yeah, one last one. You want to jump in?
Can you expand a little bit more on that? I know you say you can't, but the National Immigration Law Center said they're planning on filing a suit today.
Yeah.
But they're looking at the argument from the privacy overreach. I've also seen arguments that because this wasn't an executive memorandum, this is rather a, it's a policy memorandum from the DHS. That there is legal argument that you guys could do this under the Administrative Process Act and judicial review and challenge that. Can you give us any sort of?
I respect all those questions on those important issues, but look, right now it's just a sensitive time. Democratic AGs are in regular communication. I'm having those. Once I wrap this up, I'll be back on the phone with those guys, with those individuals. So I just don't want to get into. We just have to make some final decisions on our claims and how we're going to bring them and where we're going to bring them. And that's just, I don't want to get out ahead of my colleagues, right? We're working together on that and having a lot of conversations, and I just want to be thoughtful about that and fair to them. So. That said, look, I've been briefed many, many times already on this and potential legal theories for quite a while now, and so our team's working hard and taking a leadership role on this. But I just got to reserve that until it comes out.
Well, I guess maybe one wrap-up thought. The Republican Attorney Generals were already filing saying the current policy is unconstitutional.
Correct.
What gives you confidence that you can go the opposite direction and preserve what some of your colleagues think is unconstitutional to begin with?
Yeah, look, you guys can ask it a million different ways. I'm just not going to get into the legal theories of what those are going to be. Those will come out soon. I promise you that. They'll come out soon. Then happy to chat in detail about those once it happens. For those online, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it, and we'll get a copy of that complaint out right away. Thanks so much for joining. And thanks to all of you and to the team. They've worked so hard on this for a long, long time on this really important case. Representative Jenkins, thank you so much for your leadership, and thank all of you for being here. And we're available. All of us are available for any one-on-one questions you have. Thanks so much, everybody. Really appreciate it.